So thank you so much to the other panelists. I feel really privileged to be able to be on stage with such intelligent and talented analysts. I know we have our points of contention, but it's great to be able to talk freely with other analysts in that way, and not in a competitive aspect, but in a cooperative aspect. So I think that was great, and we'll all be around if you have questions for us. I forgot to put my contact information, but you can see me on Twitter. I'm Steffi Nanners. That's my handle, or you can just email me, Stephanie@superdataresearch.com. So enough about that. Our next speaker is wonderful. It's Simon Benson, the director of WWS Immersive Technology Group with Sony Computer Entertainment Europe. And so Simon's going to be talking about the evolution of VR specific to the Sony ecosystem. As we just talked about the fact that Sony is going to be the winner this year, and I think we all agree that in terms of high-end devices, that's the case. It's hugely accessible both on the content side and the hardware side, so there should be a lot of great insight in that respect. And a little bit more about Simon. As I mentioned, he's the director of immersive technology with Sony. And he's also the founding member of the PlayStation VR project team. So Simon has been with SCE for close to 16 years, and in his current role, he heads up a team of specialists researching and developing new technologies to bring high levels of immersion to PlayStation. So without further ado, Simon Benson.
Thank you. And note the English accent, by the way, we're doing our bit, just say that. So, just give me one sec. Perfect, thanks. Right, so I'm Simon Benson, Director of Immersive Technologies Group for Sony Interactive Entertainment. There's a few of us around from Sony today, so if you want to catch up with any of us, if anyone from Sony can put their hands up, just so everyone knows where they are in the audience, that'd be handy. So you see a few of us around, so feel free to catch up with us anytime. So what I was going to talk about today is the evolution of VR content, looking a little bit about where we are now with it, but also really focus on what's coming next. But when I talk about next, I'm not talking far distant future, we say like the next year or two really, to give you an idea of how the content's evolving. So starting where we are now. So the first thing we did when we started the whole PlayStation VR side of things was once we got our hardware together, we shared that with a lot of talented developers to get the ball rolling. The main thing that occurred then is, as soon as people got hold of the headset, it was quite apparent that making content for virtual reality is very different to making conventional content. You no longer have the screen boundaries. People have really honed their skills against making content for games, for TV, for decades. And again, we're just throwing that rule book away and we've got to rewrite a new rule book. So that's a big challenge. The main initial aspect really is just the fact that the interface is so different. You're no longer sat with a control pad in front of a screen that's away from you. You're actually inside that game world, and everything tends to be affected by just that radical change of interface. On the technical side as well, there's quite a lot of technical challenges that people face when moving to VR that's very different to conventional game development. One of the main ones really, just to pick one out of the hat really, is the frame rates. It's important to have a very high frame rate to keep you immersed and give you that sense of presence. And effectively, we're connecting your senses to the game, so it's important that we keep that and we maintain it, absolutely. But it doesn't just affect the games that we make at the end of the day, the ones that come out to the consumers. It actually affects the whole development process, because to make a game, you have to maintain that frame rate from the very beginning, which was kind of a new thing really, because in development it's not unusual that you'll have spots in your development where the game doesn't run very quickly, but that's okay because no one's seen it apart from the development team. But in VR that does matter. So again, we're changing the way we make games as well. Again, it's not just about the visuals. The audio is a really critical factor of immersion. Showing ourselves with our eyes and our tracking that we can look around a world and be present in there. Well, if our hearing doesn't respond in the same way, then again it breaks the whole side of that. So again, another aspect was everyone having to learn 3D audio, which is a whole new way of doing audio, and that's a critical part of, again, maintaining that immersion. Then the other aspect now is we've put our head in the world, that's great, but on PlayStation itself we have actually 2 different types of tracked controllers too that allow us to bring our hands into the world, which makes a huge difference for VR, and it's a real sort of, takes it up a real significant notch. So we use either our DualShock 4 track controller that everyone's got, comes with the console, or you can get the Move controllers that allowed you to have independent hand control in there. So a lot of our dev teams took this on board and realized there's a whole new space to do with these interactive controllers, and again, implemented those in the games too. The final step really of making games currently was just literally to conform to the platform rules, make sure you've got a good quality content, get it approved and get it out the door. And we're really pleased with where we are with that now. So a lot of people, a lot of developers have really done a lot of great work, and just give you a sample of some of the work now just to show you where we're at with existing content.
PEGI 18. PS4 for the players.
So as you can see, there's a huge variety already of different types of content in there. It's not all down the same genre. There's something for everyone already in that spread, and all really high quality. I don't know if any of you guys have had a chance to try any of this stuff, but certainly encourage you to try and get your hands on it and try it out for yourselves and make your own judgments. But we're really pleased with where the content side is at this stage. I think we're already at a place where we're seeing great VR content, people really understanding how to make good quality content, and there's a good spectrum of it too. So that's great for now, but where is it going next? I think this is sort of the main bulk of what we're really interested in. This clicker's not working very well here. Bear with me. So first, oh, hang on. Here we go. Right, so I'm going to split it up into 4 categories that I'll talk about today. First of all, there's the whole user experience side. On the user experience side, again, going back to the point about having honed our skills on making games for TV, where we know a lot about how to polish the user interface for that and polish up the experience that people get, and certain things become de facto standards. It's all new now for VR. We've got to relearn this entire space. So there's some elements I'll talk about in that area. User calibration, we're all different at the end of the day, and we're talking about virtual reality worlds that we believe, and yet if we're all different heights, all the rest of it, it's going to matter to some degree how we consider that when we put people in our gaming experiences, depending on what type of game it is. Again, use of the hardware features I'll talk about a little, which is really thinking about, okay, we have this hardware that is there to deliver us a virtual reality experience, but actually there's lots of other things we can do with this same hardware, and we'll see over time when people are not just focusing on the core, what do I do inside the VR world, they can think more about how to use this technology to do other things too, and really assist with the whole experience. And finally, I'll talk about social VR, which is again a big topic. So first on the user experience side, it was kind of interesting with this whole dividing line between what is and isn't a game. One of our studios made an experience called The Deep, which is basically a shark encounter, if you like, in a dive cage. But when you actually analyse what was made there was no score, there was no objective, it was just something you just participated in. But yet we took that to a load of game shows, we've shown it to lots of different people, and we've seen that unanimously gamers and non-gamers alike really like the experience. And also when you look at a standard game, you might think of maybe an action game where on an alien planet or whatever it is, shooting aliens. But you also see that some people kind of like go, well, you know what, can you just switch the aliens off for a bit? I just want to look at this planet. This is an amazing place. They're almost using the games as a form of virtual tourism to say someone has taken the effort to create this believable fantasy environment. Give me a mode of the game or a way of interacting with this game that maybe isn't like the game, it's something else. So the whole dividing line about what is and isn't a game, I think, becomes very blurred when you look at virtual reality, because what we're really talking about is this entirely new experience. The user interface as well, I think, are radically going to change over time. I think there's an art of stereoscopic graphic design, if you like, that's quite a new form of media that hasn't really been seen much. Maybe saw a little bit when 3D movies came out, but VR gives a huge opportunity for that. I think typically, again, graphic design has always been considering a flat plane that we put things on and contain things within a screen or a poster or print. But now we've given them the freedom of the world. We can put things into the world, put our UI elements wherever we want. It's almost like when you think of this vision everyone chases down about how amazing our world's going to be when we've all got augmented reality glasses and we can have things popping up on top of people in our real world. We can do that now within our games. We can prove all this out. We can really push forward what can be done in user interface terms in this space. But also thinking about the real estate that we offer as well. If we have a game where maybe the main objective is in front of us, maybe it's an arcade game, but we've transported it into virtual reality, so you've got this huge globe or something in front of you that some sort of battle is going on or whatever it would be. But we have all this space around us, so we can take our UI and we can actually place it there. We don't need to pause the game to bring up a screen because we haven't got enough real estate on our one display anymore. We can actually put these pages of information that we're interested in around us, so you can just get them at a glance. Maybe you check the high scores, check your social feeds at the side of the game, but in this same virtual world, embedded in this world. Some basic things. We have controllers, one in each hand, simply detecting which one's in the left and right hand automatically for the player to make the user experience better. It sounds a very trivial thing, but again, at the so early part of the whole process, it's surprising how many games don't do that, where you think that's kind of become a norm, really. But also we've seen this interest at the moment, and I think this could be something that's going to be much more common, where even if games don't necessarily need to have the controller inside the game world, for example, we saw a driving game where you had the steering wheel in front of you and everything else, but actually, if you brought your controller up, it became present in this virtual world just so you could understand what the controls did. So instead of having to have screens that explain the controllers, then you've got to remember what was X, X was attack, or X was brake, or whatever it would be, and you're making these choices, and which becomes a barrier really, because a lot of people don't understand controllers from the non-game perspective. But if you could just lift it up and it just puts arrows saying press this to jump, great, we're actually making it much more accessible. And I think a lot of that will be the way that we'll do these kind of controller prompts in the future. Sorry. Headset removal, again, we always think about just what's happening when we're wearing the headset and we're inside there. PlayStation Virtual Reality actually has a sensor inside, so we know whether or not you're wearing it, and we expose that to developers to let them do useful things with it. So one opportunity there might be you're playing a game, you come to a part of the game, maybe there's a rope bridge across a canyon with fire underneath and things like that, and you're kind of thinking, hang on a minute, that's not for me, I don't really want to do that. Take the headset off, it could know that you're no longer wearing it, and we just convert the game back to more of a standard camera rather than it being tracked by the headset anymore, so that you can just traverse that using your controller, put the headset back on, you're back in the world. So just allowing control of understanding what the player's interface currently is and replicating that in the game for better user experience. Using the head tracking for interesting approaches as well. We've again seen some demos that show this kind of technology, but just simple things like sensing when people are shaking the head, nodding their head, and taking them as inputs. That could be direct inputs in terms of answering questions in game in a more intuitive way, or you could use it almost subliminally. You could be monitoring that, and if you notice a point at which someone in the game starts shaking their head, you're thinking, the game now knows that this person's probably in agreement. You're almost reading their body language, and you can do interesting things with that. If it was a game that's maybe a fantasy game where you're negotiating with someone in a shop, and you might realise the game might sort of sense, I think they've reached a point where they've found a price that they like, so I'll make the shopkeeper behave in a different way. So there's lots of interesting things that can be done just with that data. Also using where the point, I call this the attention vector, if you like, where the headset is currently pointing in the game as something that you can use as a game mechanic element as well. So in this case here, you might be in a world and someone's getting really close to you and looking at you in this, and if you don't make eye contact, the game knows, so they could react in a different way. And again, you kind of feel so much more present. The game becomes much more alive because you feel so much more connected to it. And taking that further, you might have a fantasy game where you walk into a store and there's a guy selling you swords or axes or something like that on the table in front of you. And the game notices you look a little bit longer at the axe than you did the sword. So maybe the shopkeeper gives you a harder time trying to sell you that item because he knows you're interested. And you just feel like you're having your mind read. You don't think it's just this simple mechanic that's in there. You really feel that truly this game knows so much more about you and increases that emotional attachment. Talking about user calibration before, again, one point for this one is if you have a game where maybe you're, I don't know, playing a giant or a dwarf or something in a fantasy game, then it doesn't really matter, you expect to be large or small. But if you're in a game where it's trying to make you believe you're in a real world, I find this quite a lot because I'm quite tall myself. So I find if I'm put in a game and I'm put as average height, and then if I'm in a crowd of virtual people, it feels very strange to me because I'm never in a crowd of people who are the same height unless I go to some sort of basketball convention. But typically, I'm used to seeing, the majority of people below my eye height and just some similar eye heights, but the majority below. And if you're in a game somewhere where everyone's a different height, it kind of gives you a weird feeling. You're like, that's not right for me. When I walk through doors, I expect the door to just brush the top of my head. Whereas in most games, you kind of go under it at a funny height and you think that seems a bit weird. So again, I think this idea of calibrating the user and maybe asking them, what's your height? Simple thing at the beginning of the game, and then set them appropriately so the world feels right for them. Same thing with reach. How long are your arms? You can figure that out, and make sure you're representing their arms correctly in the game world. Talking now about the hardware features and other things we can do with them. With PlayStation VR, we use our PlayStation camera, which is a standard high-definition camera with 2 lenses, so it's stereoscopic. So again, you don't just have to use that just for tracking the headset. You could use that for anything else. For example, you could capture the player's face before they wear the headset, and then when they're in VR, maybe their avatar has their face, and you can do that automatically without them even having to set that up. Or again, using the camera for tracking side of things. If you're playing a social game maybe where multiple people in the room have got controllers and they're passing the headset from one person to the next, you can quickly associate which player has got the controller, so you know who's associated with which input pad without the user having to do anything or tell you anything, improving the user experience through clever use of some of the hardware features. The headset itself is an interesting device because it's effectively like a helmet, and you feel, the process of fitting it has the same kind of approach. You could imagine that maybe you're playing a game where you put the headset on, and before you put the headset on, say it's a flight simulator or something, all your briefings and all the information about what you're about to do is done just on your TV. But when you fit the headset, suddenly you become in the vehicle, and when you take the headset off, again, you're out of the vehicle, and almost that physical sense of putting something on your head fits with the whole fiction of the game. So I can really see these kind of things being used quite creatively. Hardware features as well, looking at the microphone. On PlayStation VR, we have a built-in microphone. Some people think it's just for doing voice chat and things like that, but actually there's loads of really interesting creative uses that they can put this to. Now, I'm not going to spoil all of them. I'd love to tell you more about it because it's something that actually really excites me, but Gary's actually going to be talking about this later on this afternoon in his session, so I won't spoil any of what he's got to show, but there's really interesting things you can do with the microphone in addition to just voice chat. Moving on to social VR. So again, I think it was mentioned earlier that VR can be seen as something that's quite isolating. But I think putting now, from our perspective as PlayStation, even from our very first console, it had 2 controller ports because we always valued the sense of people playing together. So right from the outset, we set off to try to create virtual reality that wasn't necessarily completely isolating. You have that choice. If you want to isolate yourself in a single-player game, fine, you can do that. But if you want to include your friends, we've got lots of ways that can be done too. So one approach that we have is this thing we call mirroring mode. This is the simple case. You can see the guy in the middle here. He's wearing the headset. He's got the controller. He's playing the game. He sees the game. Everyone else is just seeing the same sort of thing on the TV, but properly processed so it looks more conventional and more acceptable on a TV screen. So they're sat along. They can follow the game. If it's a story, they can follow the story. If there's a puzzle, they can help the player solve the puzzles. And they can take turns. They know where the game's up to. And, it's great for parents as well, knowing what the kids are playing. So I think all these things work really well from that perspective. But we took that one step further and said, well, why don't we give people the ability to change that and put whatever they want on that screen? And we've already seen some really creative uses of this kind of technology now. So in this case here, we've got the player in the middle. He can see this view, so he's looking down at these little characters. The other players in the room now playing the game on the same console, they're seeing the TV view. You can see that they're now seeing a different view where they see their characters in front of them, and they're seeing the player who's this crazy dinosaur thing wearing the headset. That's their virtual reality friend, if you like. And they can all play in the same room at the same time on the same console. And that's just the beginning of what can be done with that kind of technology. I think there's lots of opportunities for that. One example that I like to talk about a bit is 4D experiences. You know, we think people talk about the Star Trek holodeck and say, oh yeah, well, you know, virtual reality is not quite there because you can't reach out and touch things and all the rest of it. You imagine you had a game and you used that social screen to instead give instruction for other people in the room. So it said things like, tap him on the shoulder now, and just as like a zombie grabbed them or something, and you know, a real person actually touches you, or ask them to shake the hand, you reach out your hand, they actually shake it, because you give an instruction to other people in the room to basically give you a 4D experience. And you can make it quite amusing and all the rest of it, and be quite creative with that. So I think we might see some interesting uses of that screen for purposes in that kind of area. But social VR, so I said this is kind of a big topic really. So first of all, we've talked about social VR in the living room. I think those mechanisms we have there, I think we'll see a lot of use of those kind of things to really engage lots of people. And I think that also helps with the whole idea about how do we get people to try out virtual reality. So in the living room, you might have people around at Christmas, you can pass and play the headset. People aren't afraid of it because they can see what's going on the screen. They can see what the person's reacting like when they're wearing it, and then they can take a choice of trying that out. So I think that's a great way of engaging with a wide audience, really, lots of different age groups. But the online side is another interesting area. So if any of you ever tried online VR experiences, this is a whole new level again, and we haven't seen many of these yet because, again, it's still early days. But what you tend to get is, as soon as you get together with your friends online and you're all in virtual reality, you could be playing a game where maybe one of your friends is driving a vehicle, you're sat in the passenger seat, you've got a map, you're navigating, you're telling him what to do, where to go, and there's one of your other mates is in the back and maybe he's got, I don't know, a gun or something, taking out some bad guys or whatever it would be. But you do truly feel, even though you might be separated by hundreds of miles in reality, you truly feel like you're actually all sat in this same space, that you can literally just turn to them and talk to them, they're just there. And you kind of accept that and you just feel the engagement. You get the voice using the 3D audio coming from the right places, so it makes sense to you and just naturally sits. You also get the body language. You see where their head's at and the little gestures. With the hand controllers as well, you can use hand gestures and non-verbal communication. And when you see friends in an online space, it's surprising how you can recognize them without them even speaking. You can just tell. It's kind of strange, but it's kind of magical at the same time. So I think that's going to be a huge, huge space for, you know, really transforming what we mean by online play. No longer is it when you talk to your friends, they're not just a disembodied voice in the middle of your head. They're actually there with you. And I think taking that one step further and going back to the whole point about what is and isn't a game, we're also finding that when you do this kind of thing, you think about the social potential of just being with your friends and feeling that they're actually there. Well, actually, you could change the way that, you know, add some new features to games that become quite interesting. For example, in a game where it may be a sports-based game, there's an arena, as you can see in the background there. Maybe you've been playing that game, you've all had a good time on it, and then you say, you know what, let's just go, we'll go to the executive box. And you're overlooking the sport now, watching other people play it, but you're with your friends, talking to them. Some of them might go off and play the sport, and you're on this balcony looking down on them, watching them play the sport. But you can choose these places to hang out, because actually a lot of these places are pretty cool. And you could imagine that a little bit like now when people choose where they're going to go out and socialise. Should we go bowling because we want to do something that's a bit interactive and a little bit competitive? But again, you spend a lot of time sat there socialising as you're watching other people do this. Should we do something a bit more active? Maybe go paintballing, so we're all running around all the time and, you know, and doing things a bit more adventurous? Or do we just go somewhere where we just sit around, like maybe a bar or something? But you choose the bar based on how much you like its surroundings. Again, you could even do that within games. You can imagine almost picking a game that you're going to spend the evening in for whatever reason, sometimes interacting, sometimes just being part of its fiction, in the same way that people like to go and visit, you know, sets of, like, I know up in the north where we're on Coronation Street, everyone loves to go and sit in the Rover's Return, and you think it's just engaging with the fiction of that world. So that's a quick summary really of some of the things that just about fit into time. So again, thanks for listening. A few of us around from PlayStation, so if you want to catch up at any point, just give us a shout. Thank you very much. Apparently we've got some time for questions, so any quick questions? Sure. Mike's on its way.
Hi, it's Neil Kenham from VCOM. I just wondered how you see the form factor of the VR headset evolving over time, and also whether you can share with us if you have any plans for eye tracking or anything like that.
So in terms of talking about R&D for the future and all that kind of stuff, not something we really cover at this time. I think when you talk about form factor, I think one advantage that virtual reality has at the moment is the fact that because typically people are playing with this in their living room, in their house, or wherever it would be, then the form factor itself is a lot more forgiving. You know, people are much happier to wear a one-size-fits-all device that's, you know, nicely designed, but it's not like it's not necessarily a direct fashion accessory. I know people have talked about augmented reality, where they say one issue you get with augmented reality is if you're walking down the street wearing something, people are already used to glasses themselves being a fashion accessory, and therefore everyone likes to have different ones. They don't want to have the same as someone else, so it becomes a really complex problem for consumer electronics. But when it comes to virtual reality, I think things are a lot simpler when people are, you know, sat in their home. They don't mind putting their headset on. Again, we make it look as good as we possibly can. I think we've done a pretty good job on PlayStation VR. Thank God, it looks pretty nice, I'd say. But I think, yeah, you can imagine in the future, obviously everything normally gets faster, cheaper, lighter, all the rest of it over time. But I think at the moment, what we've seen is a very good reception of people like the ergonomics. There's been a lot of work put into the ergonomics. It's really important that they're balanced and not front heavy and things like that. Again, some of these mobile-based ones have the problem that they're having the bulk of your device right out here puts a lot of weight, whereas the main things you want to do with ergonomics is get it nicely balanced and weighted so that when you turn your head around, you don't get momentum and things like that, nothing's pulling your face down. So a lot of work has gone into the ergonomic side of things. And but like I say, I think the main thing really is at this stage, it's a huge advantage that this is something that people put on in the home, makes it a lot easier. Any more?
Hi, I'm Maria Sayans. I'm from CCP Games. So one of the barriers I think that prevents adoption of VR hardware when you already have it at the home, and I'm thinking of my own experience with Gear VR, is that there's just so much friction in developing a habit. Like, oh, I have to remember that it's over there, and I have to put it on, and I have to look for the moment. And I'm just thinking about PSVR in particular. Are you thinking about ways in which using the VR headset becomes the dominant way in which I play with my PS4 beyond specific VR content, and how people develop a habit around it being the main way to interact?
Sure, yeah. So it's a very good question. I think the idea that we've seen this with a lot of technologies, that when you bring some new technology into the home, it needs to form a habit. And going back to the 3D TV points that were made earlier, I think when people have glasses and they think, I'm going to sit down and watch this movie, but I've got to put some glasses on, that can become a barrier in itself because you've got this one step to take, to add this immersion. And I always think about surround sound systems. A lot of people that I know have surround sound systems at home, and it's surprisingly how infrequently they're turned on. But yet no one would ever argue that surround sound isn't more immersive than non-surround sound. So you kind of think, well, why don't people do that? And I think one major difference that VR has against these other technologies is that a lot of these other technologies, it's really about adding an extra layer of immersion. So it's like, I can watch this movie and it's fine. If I want it to be better, I can either switch my surround sound on or I can put my 3D glasses on. And if I can be bothered to do that, then I will. When it comes to virtual reality, if you want the virtual reality experience, you have absolutely no other option than to put the headset on. And I think that's one of the key differences with these types of technologies. So as opposed to it being a fidelity choice, am I playing this game on my TV or in VR, typically the games are either made for one or the other. So it's like, if I want that experience, I have to put the headset on. And again, one thing that we've tried to do is make it as easy as possible for keeping the barriers down. So for example, with PlayStation VR, we make sure it's always connected to your PlayStation console and very easy to just leave it in situ, even if you're not playing VR. So you don't have to disconnect everything. You just plug it in for the first time. You leave it there. We make it convenient. If you want to pack it away, for example, you don't take all the hardware away. There's a point in the cable where you can just put that bit, wrap it around your headset, put it in a drawer or whatever. So it's really easy that next time you just literally unwrap it, plug it back in, and it's back on. There's not a huge wiring problem. There's not a huge level of complexity, not lots of power switches. So I think there's a lot of things like that we've done to try and make it easy. But again, it's a whole new space and we're learning in this space. But we have done a lot of user testing on that, and we're quite confident that we've cut away a lot of the issues that might have been there if it was a much more complicated solution. So I think that's the way I'd answer that. I think it's really the user experience leads. If people want that experience, then that will be the thing that brings them to the content, and making it easy and simple to get the experience, keeping the barriers to entry as low as possibly can, and cutting away all the little hurdles that you have to jump to engage with it. One more. Sorry, receipt. That's it now, sorry. Right, sorry about that, we're out of time. So I guess, is it break time next? I'll leave you guys to hand over. Thank you very much then. Cheers.